Hello, welcome to Around and Around. This is day 3, and we're going to talk more about the carbon cycle. So, make sure you have your carbon cycle around and around packet out because you're going to be filling in some information in that, and you can always use that information to help you answer questions. All right, so as a warm up, we had this graph up on the board, and there were some warm up questions that we asked people to talk about. And here's the graph and the warm-up questions. So based upon the title, what is this graph showing? Well, you always want to read the title of a graph and you want to read the axes, right, how they are labeled, and try to figure out what a graph is telling you. This one is carbon dioxide concentration in the Earth's atmosphere. And so we know that it has something to do with how much carbon dioxide is in the atmosphere, which is the gases trapped next to the planet. So we know it's going to be showing some amount of carbon dioxide in the Earth. What is represented on the x-axis, remember that's your horizontal axis, that's our year. So we are increasing in years. We start 1700, 1750, 1800, 1850, 1900, 1950, and so on. And then what's on the y-axis? That is the carbon dioxide concentration in parts per million. So mostly what we need to know is that that is giving us a numerical value for how much carbon dioxide is in the atmosphere. All right, and what do we notice? Well, we notice that it was increasing slowly. Slope of a line, right, is telling you the rate of change. So our slope was gradual right here, and then all of a sudden we took a sharp turn, and this is a much bigger, faster increase in carbon dioxide, right? That slope is steeper, so the rate of change is steeper or greater. We are having a higher increase of carbon dioxide concentration over time, starting around roughly 1950. So that's what we notice from that graph, and we can think about reasons that might have caused that. Okay, oops, hang on one sec, I'll get us back. Okay, so that was a warm-up question for people to be thinking about, and then we thought about whether people had travel plans, so happy Thanksgiving to all. And of course, some people had travel plans and some people were going to stay put and have people come to them. Just a reminder, we're learning about the path of carbon, and we're talking about carbon reservoirs. Oh, goodness, sorry, too many clicks, didn't mean to do that. So reservoirs, that's like a bucket of carbon or a pool of carbon. Where are the big areas where we can store carbon or move carbon from one place to another? And so we're also thinking right now a lot about human impact. And so if I'm thinking about human impact, I might come back to this graph and think, what kinds of things were happening in the 1950s here that had to do with humans? How could humans be impacting the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere? Because the atmosphere is one of those reservoirs of carbon. It's a place we have a lot of carbon. Okay, why am I doing all of this? It's so I can understand how matter moves between biotic and abiotic parts of the ecosystem. We are still talking about how are we moving matter from one place to another, and specifically we're talking about carbon, although other kinds of matter can also move from one section to another. All right, so quick reminder, on November 30 and December 1, that's Thursday and Friday, we have the test for science that's going to have a couple of questions on photosynthesis and cellular respiration. So those are from your recipe for a food supply notes. And we're going to have some questions about the carbon cycle. It's going to be more on the carbon cycle. Always double check your old exit tickets. You can look through notes and you can look through warm-ups and things, practice questions, just to make sure you're good to go and ready to take the test. All right, so back to this graph again. It's carbon dioxide concentration in the Earth's atmosphere. Sorry, and we've talked about this a fair bit already, but one of the things that might have happened in the 1950s is more industrialization. We've got more factories. And when we have factories, they are burning fuel in some way and releasing the emissions from that burning into the air. And so we can have, if we burn anything, we're going to release carbon dioxide into the carbon into the atmosphere, usually in the form of carbon dioxide. And so in the 1950s, we have more factories. We also start having more cars with families and households. And as we are increasing our population in the United States in particular, we're doing some deforesting. We're taking down trees either to use those trees for lumber or to clear space to be able to build um, housing developments and things like that. So we have a lot of things going on that are human things. We have impacted the whole environment as humans, and we can see that we have increased the amount of carbon dioxide and how quickly the carbon dioxide is being released into the atmosphere. Okay, so in today's folder in Schoology, there is a carbon cycle practice independent work. Sorry, it's not the independent work. You want just the carbon cycle practice for this. It's a very quick piece of information, so you can click out of the video and see if you can find carbon cycle practice, and then I'll try to talk about that. We only took about 4 minutes, so you shouldn't need too much time. Okay, so pause if you haven't finished the independent practice, because this is what it is. All right. So we're going to think about the carbon cycle and move the words below. There were words down here below in your practice, and you were dragging them to match which number they represented. Okay, it's showing how the carbon is moving. Those arrows show that in this case, this is a factory, carbon is moving out of that factory and into the atmosphere. In this case, carbon is moving from the tree into the atmosphere, or it's moving from the atmosphere into the tree. Okay, in this case right here, this is another number 2. It's going from this animal into the atmosphere. It's also going from the ocean here into the atmosphere. So let's go ahead through these number 1 through 7. Number 1, that's combustion. We're burning fuels in some way, and that's releasing carbon into the atmosphere. Number 2 is going to be respiration. So remember, plants do cellular respiration as well as animals, right? Plants tend to do that when they're not in daylight, right? Because they'd rather do photosynthesis. Okay, so that's respiration. 3, we're coming from the atmosphere up here back to the tree. And that's going to be photosynthesis. That's how we get carbon from the atmosphere into the tree. Diffusion for number 4. We've got number 4, diffusion. So we want to have a balance. If there's higher concentration of, I've clicked too many times. Higher concentration of carbon in that atmosphere near the water, it's going to diffuse in. Okay, number 5, let's find number 5. Here it is, from the tree to the animal. That's going to be consumption or eating. Number 6, I have number 6, from an animal into the soil. And decomposers are going to do that. That's just decomposition. So number 7, and you can also have from decomposition, you can also have some carbon released into the atmosphere. And then finally, when we are having old plant and animal material that is fossilized into fossil fuels, that process is called fossilization. All right, so when we pretended to be a carbon atom and wandered around to 10 stations in the room a couple lessons ago, I had some of the classes record how many times they went to each one of the stations. So if I had deep ocean dissolved particles right here, maybe we had 18 visits to that station. Maybe we only had about 5 visits to the ocean plants. A lot of visits over here, more than 50 probably to surface ocean. So I just wanted to have a visual so you could see as people were being carbon and plomping around from one place to another. We had a lot of visits to surface ocean and a lot of visits to atmosphere. So those are kind of our bigger locations that we saw where there were exchanges of carbon. And then deep ocean dissolved was the next lowest. Realize that if you had done that activity for several days in a row, or even every single day you came to science for a whole quarter, you're probably going to have ended up visiting all of the stations. And so it might even out a little bit, but you can still see we have a big big ocean surface on our planet, and so it makes sense that between the surface of the ocean and the atmosphere, we might have super big exchanges. All right. So there is a two-way carbon exchange that can occur quickly between those surface waters and the atmosphere, right? It's a big surface area for the ocean and the atmosphere where they touch. So that's pretty quick if you have diffusion or something happening and allowing the carbon to move from one to another. But also, carbon can be stored down in those deepest ocean depths for centuries. So, if carbon ends up in sediment that settles to the bottom of the ocean and then more sediment is put on top of it, it can be centuries. It can be centuries, not just, in minutes transferring that carbon. So, we have a fast process and we have a slow process. All right, if you look to page 11 in your packet, and our packets weren't really numbered, but you want this one that says lesson 3 right at the top right here. We're gonna talk about another lab called Carbon in Flux. So please read through this introduction. I'm going to back up one more time. Sorry, my mouse is very, very sensitive today. So I just want to make sure that we're thinking about how do humans affect the carbon cycle, and how can we use models to illustrate or explain or predict the changes in that carbon cycle. We're going to think about Earth's climate and the oceans a lot in this case. Okay. So as you learned about around and around we go, carbon moves in a continuous cycle between Earth's 4 spheres: living things, water, land, and air. If left unchanged, the carbon cycle maintains a relatively steady concentration of carbon among the Earth's spheres. The term flux is used to describe something that is constantly changing, or to describe a liquid moving or flowing. And you can think of the word fluctuate. Things that are fluctuating are things that are changing. Okay, so carbon in flux is a useful phrase to use when investigating how carbon moves between its pools or reservoirs each year in the carbon cycle. So again, that's what we're talking about. That's our big idea for these lessons, right? Is how is that carbon moving? So carbon in flux is a carbon changing from one sphere to another. In this investigation, we're going to create a diagram to illustrate carbon flux. So we're going to use resources to learn about the causes and effects of excess carbon on global climate, also on sea level, and on ocean water acidity. So keep that in mind, especially as you're getting ready to answer exit ticket questions later. This last paragraph is telling you some good information. We're going to learn about the causes and effects of excess carbon on our global climate, on the sea level, and on ocean water acidity. And we're going to try to think about how we might be able to shift carbon flux as humans. All right. So again, flux comes from that word fluctuate. When you did your gizmos recently, you had these ovals that were labeled as so, like soil, land, plants, fossil fuels, and so on. Those are the carbon pools or carbon reservoirs that we're thinking about. Those are kind of broad categories that we say we have carbon stored in. So a carbon pool or a carbon reservoir is a place that has the ability to store and release carbon. So if you look in your notes on this page where it says greenhouse gases, you're going to be filling in information on these pages using independent work that you can find in Schoology. So let me walk you through it a little bit first, and then you'll go ahead and click over in Schoology to the independent work so you can fill this information in. We're going to talk about greenhouse gases. What are they? Give us examples. And do we need them? Yes, we do need them. Try to come up with some reasons that we do need them, but also some reasons that they might be a bad thing. We're going to think about fossil fuels and come up with some examples. And this section here, 3, more greenhouse gases in the atmosphere has led to climate change. So you're going to have to think about how have we changed the climate, and then signs of climate change. You're just going to use the link provided again to come up with some examples of climate change. Okay, what role do oceans play in the carbon cycle, and how is global warming impacting our oceans? Those are all things you want to think about as you're going through the independent work so that you can be filling in your notes. All right, again, carbon dioxide. Who cares? Well, we do. We'd better care because we humans are impacting the amount of carbon dioxide in the air. All right, so you'll go into Schoology, and it is our independent work, classwork, carbon cycle day 3. And when you're finished, if you're watching this video, you don't have to be reading a book or doing other homework. You can pop back in and think about doing your exit ticket. All right, so just to make sure you can find that independent work, you're going to go into your Schoology, whichever class period you have science, click on Current Lab, and we are on our pink day, which is day 3. So you'll see that we have an around and around independent work slide deck. Okay, and after you've finished that and filled in that paperwork, actually come back to the video. So you're going to pause the video while you do this. Come back to the video because I'll do some quick review before you complete your exit ticket. There are a couple of short videos within that independent work that'll help you, so make sure you check those out. All right, so if you have finished going through that independent work and filling out your papers in your packet, I want you to take a look at this video. This is not one that was included in your independent work, and hopefully I'll have this set up properly so that you can hear the video and not me. Give me 1 second to do that.
The Flux network measures carbon dioxide, water, and energy fluxes in the North, Central, and South American ecosystems. Funded by the U.S. Department of Energy's Office of Science, the grassroots investigator-driven network includes more than 110 sites and contributes to important ecological and atmospheric climate research. In South Carolina, Savannah River National Laboratory's Atmospheric Technologies Group plays a vital scientific role in this network by collecting and analyzing data in and around DOE's Savannah River site.
At SRNL, we are performing carbon cycle research aimed at analyzing how the forests that stretch across the SRS are taking up carbon and then respiring it. Specifically, we are looking at how disturbances and changes to the forest affect the carbon cycle.
Through the burning of fossil fuels and deforestation, there's a global imbalance in the carbon cycle, resulting in global warming and climate change. Researchers believe carbon sequestration inside forested carbon sinks may help reduce this imbalance.
A carbon sink describes an environment that is taking in more carbon than it is releasing back to the atmosphere.
During photosynthesis, trees and plants sequester or absorb carbon from the atmosphere in the form of carbon dioxide, using it as food.
We see a cycle of carbon that is being absorbed through the day as trees are photosynthesizing and growing. And then at night, when the stomata on the vegetation close, we do see a small release of carbon back to the environment. So SRS provides a really nice environment to study carbon dynamics because we have such extensive forests across the site that it's really an undisturbed environment. It's a very pristine environment for examining carbon cycle. SRNL helps maintain instrumentation at 2 towers. One is the Aiken Ameriflux Tower located on SRS. The second tower allows us to put instruments up to 330 meters off the ground and gives us more of a landscape representation of what the carbon cycle looks like.
SRNL instrumentation collects detailed multi-level measurements for carbon and water vapor fluxes, soil moisture measurements, and methane, in addition to assisting the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's Trace Gas Sampling Program. Sonic anemometers, which look like claws, measure turbulent fluctuations in wind and temperature. And glycor sensors analyze carbon dioxide and water vapor concentrations.
So this is a Lycor 7500 instrument, and this is the primary instrument we use on site to measure carbon fluxes. It works by emitting a infrared laser from one end to the other, and based on the attenuation of that laser in the atmosphere, we are able to assess how much CO2 and how much water vapor is in the atmosphere. And we're doing that 10 times a second, so that way we know how quickly is carbon either leaving the forest or how quickly is it being taken up by the forest.
Beyond Ameriflux research, SRNL collaborates with the University of Georgia's Savannah River Ecology Laboratory, the University of Alabama, and the U.S. Forest Service to develop strategies for managing the forest understory to help improve carbon sequestration. By accumulating and studying substantial amounts of data over a long period of time, experts are able to gain a clearer understanding of our ecosystems. This collected data provides a unique opportunity for advances in global climate models, improved climate change forecasting, and ultimately enhanced shared knowledge between a vast network of international partners working together to further our scientific understanding of a complex climate.
What I love about this work is being able to get out into nature and see the environments that we're trying to model and where we're putting this data to work. And it's wonderful to be able to get up here and get this high-level view where you can see out over the trees and see how the forest structure is arranged and what that could mean as we make changes to it going forward.
All right, so before you do your exit ticket, if you want to take a quick look at the following slides, I'll go through them. The four spheres that we talk about having carbon travel between, there's going to be the biosphere where we have living things. Our atmosphere is the air and gases trapped against the planet, and our geosphere is going to be earth and soil and rocks and things. And our hydrosphere, of course, is going to be the water. So we actually, in class, used a series of cards to try to show how the carbon flux is happening. Where is the carbon going? And then we even tried to calculate exactly how much carbon was being used. So if you want to come during a Falcon Focus to look at these cards and take a quick peek at how we did this activity, you can. We first had a baggie. It was filled with different kinds of cards, and we pulled out these four blue cards that represented our spheres. And once we had those spheres, we just remembered that we measure the amount of carbon that's exchanged. If you think back to the gizmos, we measure this in gigatons. Gigatons. 1 gigaton is 1 billion tons. Okay, that's a lot. It's 10 to the 9th power if you're thinking math. All right, so during this activity, we worked with a partner in general. Sometimes 3 people work together. And so our baggie looked like this. So we had 4 blue cards that I asked everybody to pull out and arrange on the table. It didn't really matter how you arranged them, but it was kind of helpful if we had air at the top and water at the bottom. So, okay. Then there were 11 cards, I think, that had different figures, and so everybody was trying to decide which place, which blue carbon reservoir we would put each one of these pictures under. But I had everybody just take a look. Soil and rocks, that's obvious that it goes under land or geosphere. But we also include cars and homes, this should say factories, cars and homes and factories as part of the land carbon pool, because our cars and our homes and our factories are all using land-based fuel for the most part. So we put homes and cars and factories, and there was another card that had rocks and soil. We put those all under the blue card that said land. So I'm going to click through since you don't have the cards in front of you. This is what it ended up looking. We had, looking like, excuse me, we had a cloud in the air. So cloud represents water vapor and air. And then under our living things, we have, this is a forest. This is a single tree. We have a dog and a cat and a human, right? And other, whatever creature that is. And we have decomposers. Anything that was living goes in the biosphere. Our water, our hydrosphere, we just represented using a big wave. And then for land, we had a volcano. So you're thinking in this case about the volcano, that the magma that's burning, right? And we had a home, just general rocks and soil, vehicles, and factories. These aspects of our lives are all using land. That's how we're thinking about it. They're storing carbon in the land, and then they will release it. So the next set of cards that we had in the baggie helped to show how much carbon moves between those four pools. So we're going to use the carbon flux cards provided by me, and as you read each card, you would lay it down on your model to show which direction the carbon is moving. All right, so they were orange cards in the baggie, and you might have gotten an orange card that said volcanoes erupt. So we have carbon going from the land to the air. So from the land, right, to the air. When that happens, scientists have estimated that 0.1 gigatons will be released. 0.1 gigatons of carbon will go from land to air. And then so from land to air like that. Then we actually had little orange cards for most of these processes. And so each time we knew an amount of carbon that was going from one sphere to another. Okay, we did this with all of the orange cards, and what we ended up with is we have carbon moving from the air to the living things and also to the water. We can see in this example so far, we have 120 gigatons going from air to living things, and we have 92 going from air to water. And so everybody started adding up the totals. Okay, so I have two things leaving the air and going to living things, leaving the air and going to water. And then you can see my red arrows are going to the air or atmosphere. And each one of these numbers represents the gigatons that we expect to be going from one place to another. Okay, we also had some carbon going from like living things to land. This is purple because that wasn't something we were focusing on for today. We weren't looking at the exact amount there. All right, but in the end, what does it mean? Well, we can calculate how many gigatons are leaving the air and going into other spheres, and we can calculate how much carbon is going from the other spheres and into the air. So total amount of carbon moving into the air, when you add it all up, all of the ones that were aiming for the air, you got 222.1 gigatons. And when you added up what was happening for carbon coming out of the air, it was 212 gigatons. So that seems pretty close, right? That's only about 10 gigatons difference, right? Approximately. So we have 10 gigatons more carbon being released into the atmosphere than we have coming out of the atmosphere. So the thing is 10 doesn't seem like a very big number, but remember, this is gigatons. And so 1 gigaton, listen to this, it's more than 6 million blue whales. That's a lot. Okay, 1 gigaton would be 1 billion tons. All right, so visualizing a gigaton again, one single gigaton, and we're talking 10, but just one would be over 6 million blue whales, would be over 100 million African elephants, over 20 times the entire population of our world. and the water in 400,000 Olympic pools. That's a lot of carbon. All right, so then we wanted to think about what is the process that caused our carbon to go from one pool to another. So looking back at our four spheres again, to go from land to air, that's going to be combustion. If we burn something, we're going to change carbon from land format into air format. To go from air into living things, air into water. Air to living things is going to be photosynthesis. Air to water is going to be diffusion. When we look at going from, we know combustion is going to get our land to air. Sorry, that's an extra little click in there. If I'm going from living things to air, one way that we can have carbon go from living things to air is respiration, cellular respiration, right? And that's not just the plants, that's the animals too. Okay, if we have decomposers doing decomposition, decomposition is the process, and it releases carbon into the air. It also releases carbon into the soil or the earth, the land, right? Okay, if we think about a forest releasing carbon into the air, of course it can be through photosynthesis, but it also can be through combustion. So if there's some sort of a forest fire, that burning of the forest also can release carbon into the atmosphere. If we have water releasing carbon into the air, it's going to be through decomposition. Okay, and so then we cleaned up our cards and we had a little brain break, although we never found that pumpkin in any of my classes, so maybe it's not there. If you think back to your packet where you used arrows to show how you traveled when you were pretending to be a carbon atom in the classroom, you can compare what you wrote on that day to the visual that we just made. And the biggest difference, think if you can come up with it on your own, the biggest difference is that we are talking about the human impact much more in today's lesson, right? We didn't really talk about humans when we were talking about how carbon moved around in class a couple days ago. But right now we're thinking, how are humans having these impacts? All right. So which area of our diagram do we think would be most affected if we included human activities? I'm going to back up. Remember, we have a lot of humans are using factories and cars and homes, right? So we have carbon going from land into the atmosphere. Human impact over here with living things. So one of our biggest impacts is going to be on the atmosphere from our cars and from our factories. Okay, also from heating our homes and using electricity. All right, and even there was just a little article here where somebody had a pyrotechnic device, fireworks and things like that. That's going to release carbon too. Okay, so humans are impacting the atmosphere quite a bit. Okay, and again, here we have our graph from the very beginning of class. Around the 1950s, you can see there's a change in how quickly we are releasing carbon dioxide into the air. Okay, so starting in the 1850s, with massive deforestation, that means taking away trees around the world. In the 1950s, there was a dramatic increase in the burning of fossil fuels. We burned coal to make electricity and steel. We burned oil in vehicles and manufacturing, and it accelerated or it increased the rate of carbon dioxide being pumped into the atmosphere. There you see it around the 1950s, and you can see it. You can see that slope change. So tell your math teacher you understand slope. All right, quick review. Use your notes as you're watching through these questions, and then you'll do your exit ticket. So after you've done the independent work, hopefully you have learned about greenhouse gases. The greenhouse effect is going to have some sunlight that hits the earth and is reflected back into space. But most of the time when we have that sunlight coming in toward the Earth's atmosphere, it's going to reflect back and forth, and greenhouse gases are going to prevent all of the heat from escaping back into space. So some of the warmth and energy from the sun is going to come to the earth and be trapped in the atmosphere against the earth. That's what those greenhouse gases do. They prevent heat from escaping into space, and so they help warm the planet. Some of the sunlight does reflect back out, but a lot is trapped in against the earth. Again, these are gases that trap heat in our atmosphere. They act like a blanket. Okay, and so greenhouse gases help hold on to the air. Greenhouse gases in the air hold on to the heat, and they vibrate, which is what is keeping us warm. Heat trapping gases, including carbon dioxide, so that's one of them. Methane is another, so that's CH4, one carbon and four hydrogens. And then water vapor, that's H2O. And so we care right now about our carbon because we're just talking about how carbon goes from one place to another. So why do we need some greenhouse gases? We need some greenhouse gases. Here's the positive effects, because without greenhouse gases, Earth would be too cold for life, right? Some greenhouse gases are actually naturally occurring, and normal amounts of greenhouse gases are good. That's a positive thing for the Earth. Okay, why are too many greenhouse gases harmful? It makes our Earth too hot sometimes. With more greenhouse gases, too much heat is trapped in. It's leading to global warming. Global warming, the entire globe is heating up. Okay, so some of the negative effects of global warming: we have warmer temperatures throughout, right? It causes some droughts, which means it's too dry. And that can mean that maybe crops can't grow, and that's harder for farmers. And then it has a big impact on people who need to eat the food that the farmers are raising. Okay, extreme weather events are more likely. They've been increasing over time since we've had this higher carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Our sea levels are rising because we're melting some of those ice caps, and so melted ice becomes water, and it helps make those sea levels rise. That causes a loss of biodiversity. We might not have the variety of plants and animals, and that's because some of those habitats are being destroyed. We can have an increase in forest fires. Another reason that we might lose biodiversity is with the sea level rising and the increase in carbon dioxide in that water. Some of our oceans are a little bit more acidic, and so just a little bit of acidity is going to change which plants and animals can live there. All right. What role do the oceans play? Well, the ocean holds 50 times more carbon dioxide than the atmosphere. Okay, and so we have to just realize that we do have carbon dioxide in a cycle here, right? Oops, clicked on the wrong button. Sorry. So the ocean is it's a huge thing that impacts our carbon locations. All right, what are we doing to help? Well, hopefully you've read a little bit about that, and we're going to focus more in our next class. But we have an exit ticket found in Schoology in today's folder. And of course, you can always use your notes and try twice if you don't get full credit on the first one. All right, thanks for watching.